Alright, hey guys, what's up? This is Mackenzie Criswell here with a tutorial for designing some of the elements in my heads-up display. Alright, so like I just said, we're going to be doing a tutorial over designing some of the elements in this heads-up display that I created. I recently did a tutorial on it, actually, literally like 5 seconds ago. Here is kind of the look of it. It's kind of hidden by some color grading and stuff, but you know how it goes. Anyways, what I'm doing is a tutorial to show you how to actually create some of the elements that we composited. In the last tutorial, we actually only composited all of these elements that I created onto this kind of piece of glass phone screen. And it definitely was a helpful tutorial for someone trying to create a heads-up display, but not really helpful for someone trying to design a heads-up display. So what I'm going to do is pick a couple of elements that I really liked in the heads-up display, mostly the shield here, and then we'll do part of another element, and I'll show you how I designed them inside of After Effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this tutorial. Let's bring out what we're working on. Here is the shield design, and this is going to be mainly what we are focusing on. Now, to be in all fairness, I didn't come up with all of these techniques myself. I'm borrowing some from a couple of tutorials I've seen in the past and that kind of thing. So this isn't something that I just came up with. So please don't, give me credit for something I haven't done. I always like to try to give credit where it belongs. And I did not come up with all of these techniques, but I did use them all. So now that we've got all this out of the way, it seems like I talk forever before I even start a tutorial. We'll just, I'm just going to stop talking. Okay, so we'll create a new composition. That is Command N or composition, new composition, and you need to kind of work based off of the resolution that you're using. For example, if you were using 4K, you definitely want a resolution a lot higher than 1000 by 1000, but I'll use this since I'm working at 1080p, and I will call this shield design. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is try to kind of create some of these elements. You can see we have some elements that have been slightly modified and then just kind of scaled down and changed the opacity and that kind of good stuff in this composition. Now, keep in mind, you're probably not ever going to be able to perfectly duplicate something like this ever. It's just one of those things that can't be perfectly duplicated. And if you look at it from an optimistic standpoint, that's pretty good, because one, no one's going to be able to copy your work. Say you design a HUD for Iron Man, no one's ever going to be able to create that same HUD again. If you look at it from a more pessimistic point, if you made great HUDs for Iron Man and then they call you back to do the work for Iron Man 2, well, you're screwed over. Let's go ahead and create a new layer here. We'll do layer, new, solid. Let's make it black to start off with because we're going to be designing some white elements. And if you hit Q on the keyboard, you can kind of cycle through some of these masks objects. Now, if you are using a version of After Effects before keyboard shortcuts were invented, you might need to go up here and hold down on the mask button and then select the mask you're working on. Now, what I like to do is just double-click here to create a perfect circle around the edges, and then you can click on the mask. And if you start to scale it down, you can see it doesn't fit perfectly and all that stuff. But if we hold down Shift, it'll scale down proportionally. And then if we hold down Control or Command on a Mac, it'll scale down perfectly in the center. So we can just create an object more or less the size that we want. Oops, Command Alt. There we are. Okay. And then we can start to apply some of these effects. Now, some of these effects we're going to apply are going to be kind of motion graphic-y elements that you rarely ever use. Now, this first technique that I'm going to show you is very, very simple. If you know what a stroke on text is, it's just kind of a line that goes around the text, and a lot of people use it to kind of make the text try to pop out or something like that. but this effect stroke actually has some cool things that we're going to use. So what I'm going to do is turn up the brush size, and this is basically, you know, the width of this is what it could interpolate over to. And we'll turn it up to about yay big. And this isn't very useful for our HUD right now, but what we can do is turn up the spacing some. And what it'll do is create these cool circles around the edge. And the more you turn up the spacing, the more space is going to be in between these circles, and the more circles there'll be. So let's go ahead and make a duplicate copy of this layer. We can do, again, edit, duplicate, or Command D. And we'll delete the effect that's on here, the stroke effect, as you saw me just do. And we'll apply an effect called Vegas. Now, this is one of those effects that you would never, ever guess what it does unless you started messing around with it. Now, when we first apply it, in this particular instance, it's not going to do anything. That's because the stroke of the Vegas effect is set to go around the image contours, and there aren't any because it's just a black solid. So we need to tell it to go around the mask. And that's why you're duplicating this layer instead of creating another new layer, because mask. And bringing that down, I'm just hitting M. You can also hit these little arrows to open things up. It's a keyboard shortcut I use every single time I open After Effects. Now, what we're going to try to create using these two effects is this kind of loading symbol here. Looks like kind of a futuristic loading sign. It's just kind of some bars circling around. Looks like an upgraded version of Windows XP, kind of, in a weird way. But what I'm going to do is turn down the number of segments on the Vegas effect. And as you can see here, it's set to 32, and we have a whole lot of kind of tiny dashes just darting around. They look like little minnows. And we'll turn these down to 2 or 3, 4, maybe, I'll actually just turn it down to 1 for this loading symbol. And then what I'll do is turn up some of the width. And then I'll actually make it a little bit harder around the edges of this width. As you can see, it's kind of feathering out on the edges, and that could be cool for some effects, but it's not really what we want here. So we can just turn up the hardness. You probably want to avoid making it 100 or, you know, full 1%, so like 0.9 or something like that. Probably be just fine. And you can see what we've created here is kind of the shape of the loading symbol, but now we need to create these dots, and this is very easy. What we'll do is we'll change this yellow to white here, and then we'll select our bottom layer. Make sure you hit F4 if this track matte option is not showing up, or you can use these 3 little buttons down here to bring up all the different options. And we'll change the track matte to use the Luma matte of this. Oops. And now you can see we've more or less created that loading symbol. Now, if you want there to be bigger stripes kind of here and fewer of them, you can always come into the Vegas effect, turn up the brush size. So now we've created this object here, but the problem is it almost loops all the way around it. We're seeing way too much of this loading symbol, for my taste at least. So what we can do is come to the stroke effect, excuse me, not the stroke effect, the Vegas effect up here, and turn down the length of our matte that we're using. And so as we turn this down or up, it'll make parts of it disappear. And this would be a cool way to kind of have it load on if you wanted to do some animation to bring in those parts, which is something I recommend if you're doing like a shot of a HUD starting up. I'm sure they did a lot of that kind of work on Oblivion and Iron Man, those kind of movies. So if you're doing a HUD starting up, you definitely want to have something like this, but you don't want to do it in every single shot, because eventually, you know, the HUD's going to be started up, and it'll just be a waste of your time to then have it start up again for every single shot. And somebody is going to notice that you cheated. So what we want to do is have some animation to this, because right now it just kind of sits here, and this is boring. It doesn't look like it's loading at all. So what I'll do is hit R to bring up the rotation values, again, you can just hit these little triangles to bring up all your different commands, all your effects, transformations, masks, all that kind of crap. We'll hit R on both of these, and we'll hold down Alt and click on this stopwatch here. And what this allows us to do is insert an expression. I know to a lot of After Effects users, especially new After Effects users, probably just new After Effects users, it seems quite intimidating, but there's a lot of very simple expressions we can use to make our job a lot easier. So I type in times, which is the star key on the keyboard, say 50, 40, 60, somewhere around in there. And if we come around here, we can take a look and we can see we've added some very basic animation. Now, if you need to kind of keep an eye on this, because what you'll notice is our design is kind of pointed towards where it would be turning counterclockwise. But the problem is this is turning clockwise rather than counterclockwise. And a very easy way to reverse that is just take our expression here and add a dash or negative sign, whatever you want to call it, in front of it, and After Effects will realize that and make it turn counterclockwise instead. So we can just take that same effect, copy it over, time times negative 50, and now if we turn our track mat on, awesomeness is now in our hands. Now the only problem is we have this weird kind of white speck in front of everything else. Now there's a very easy way to get rid of that, excuse me. We can go to our expression underneath our top layer, click on this, and just start adding to it. So we can add maybe, I think, 7. Got rid of it in the original. Well, we might need to go to 8. 8 or 9 here. We'll just do a solid 10. And what that'll do is add a value to the rotation. And there's not really a clear way for me to demonstrate that here, but basically what it's doing is instead of starting the rotation at 0, it starts it at 10. And so by offsetting the two rotation values a little bit, that'll just get rid of that weird speck in the front. So now we have our loading symbol done, and let's go ahead and try to create some of these other elements pretty quickly so we don't waste too much time. And create another new black solid. I'll go ahead and create another mask on it. I can scale down the mask again to fit kind of where I want it to go, more or less. What is helpful is if we take all of these layers and change the blending mode to screen. Since they're all kind of white solids, that'll help to blend them together without having to like add an alpha channel to all of them. So we'll go ahead and take the Vegas effect and apply it here. Again, change it to mask path, and that'll create some lines around here. We'll make the color white, and then we can take the segments amount and turn it down so that we only have a few of these lines and stuff isn't looking weird. So we can just leave it at the default. We can take the rotation and again just apply a quick time, rotation, return to Alt, click on that, and type in something like time times 25 or something. And then just make a couple of duplicate copies. Okay, now what we can go ahead and do is edit the rotation value on some of these to add some variation. And I like to keep them spinning in the same direction at the very least. But we can kind of add time or remove time. We don't have to change them a whole lot, just give them a little bit of variation to make them look not so uniform, and that generally seems to help. We can even kind of play around with the length. Okay, now the next thing we can do is go ahead and make a new solid. We'll make this one white, actually. White, that was, in case you didn't catch it. And what I'll go ahead and do with this one is again create another oval mask, and with this one I'll just copy and paste the same mask. So edit, copy, Command C, or edit, paste, or Command V, and we'll set the second part of the mask to subtract, and then just turn up the feather amount. So this will create an interesting beveled type of look. You can see what I'm talking about here. And I actually kind of flipped this on the inside in the original. So if we were trying to duplicate that, what we'd actually need to do is take the mask paths for both of these, shift down, and then rather than feather this mask, we would actually want to be feathering this one. Then we can scale that down, take it, put it below everything, and just add a little bit of something there to give it kind of to give this more shape or whatever. We can also lower the opacity if we need to. Choose F. And you can see what that does. Now, the other thing that I did was I created some white layers and just made basically some lines. And the way that I did that was with an effect called beam. This isn't used very much unless you're trying to create like lightsabers or something most of the time. But in any case, it is a very, very helpful effect. It kind of starts off with a lightsaber looking design, unfortunately, though. So we have to edit a little bit. We'll make the length 100%. And then we'll make the colors white and white, of course. I'll make the softness 0, the ending thickness about 3. Same with the starting thickness, the time at 50, so that it will be all the way through. And we can turn off any kind of 3D perspective or anything like that that happens to be there. So here's our beam, and we basically just created a straight line. So we could have done it with a mask, but, you know, whatever. And we'll go ahead and apply a rotation to this. So rotation, time, times, and we'll probably want to add a negative value, so maybe negative 50. Actually, you know, hey, let's make this like negative 100. Let's have it spin it fast. So there we are. And then I just kind of duplicated a whole bunch of copies of these and took the rotation values, edited them, and it's that portion. Now probably the next thing you'll notice down here is a cool kind of grid up in the corner, up behind it. So the way we created that was I just created a new black solid and put that on the outside. And then I used the CC grid effect, I believe is what it's called. It might just be grid. CC grid. Yeah, it's just called grid. I used the grid effect to create a grid over the background. So pretty simple. What I'll do is just kind of animate the corner points to make this grid a little bit smaller. So maybe 550 and 550. We can adjust the size of the border, make it maybe like that big. Now what you can also do is take that CC radial blur effect and put it on here. Turn it up some. And you'll start to get some cool effects that way. So what I actually did in the original example is I pre-composed these two layers by choosing layer, pre-compose, and I put them into their own comp called grid. And then I took a mask, made it a little bit smaller. So that it would fit in here. And then I just kind of feathered it out until I felt like it fit the design. So, and then what I did was duplicated it, used that, and then used that CC radial blur to just kind of put a cool edge on it. And what you can, and that makes it pretty intense at the bottom, but what you can do to make it even cooler is if you switch over to working in 32 bits per channel by alt-clicking on the 8-bit per channel sign, what you can do is maybe take like a fill effect and fill it with a white that's actually brighter than white. So if you make all these like 5, 5, and 5, that'll make a super bright white. Okay, now what I did was I took Control A, layer, pre-composed all of these, called this main shield, or preliminary shield would probably be a better name for it. And then I just duplicated copy, scaled it down, offsetted the timing a little bit. That. Now, I used the same technique in our other tutorial, the set matte tutorial, to kind of key this to get rid of some of the alpha. As you might recall if you watched the other tutorial, that is created from the black solids. And then I'll just add that fill effect back on, make it white. There we are. And then I just kind of added that up in the corner to make it look a little bit more like it belonged. And we could even make this kind of we could fill this entire thing with a super bright white to make it stand out a little bit more if we wanted to. Now you can see here, obviously these two are not quite the same designs. I actually am kind of liking this one a little bit better than this one now. But anyways, this has been Mackenzie Criswell. I hope you very much so enjoyed this tutorial. If you're looking for any more great VFX tutorials, you can head it over on my website, mackenziecriswell.com also. And until next time, I'm Mackenzie Criswell. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.